The utopian guillotine, when idealism becomes evil. For the next few minutes, we invite you to engage in a dangerous but necessary thought experiment. We're going to examine one of the most unsettling ideas in human history, that the road to hell is not paved with bad intentions, but with the very best ones. We're going to look at the 20th century's greatest butchers, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, not as simple monsters, but as men possessed by a utopian vision. And then, with the help of some of history's deepest thinkers, we will hold up a mirror to our own time, to the age of identity politics and wokeness, and ask a terrifying question. Could the same philosophical mechanics that powered the totalitarian nightmares of the past be operating in a different form today? The idealist's blueprint for hell. Let us begin by stating the controversial thesis clearly. Hitler and Stalin were, in a purely philosophical sense, idealists. Hitler's ideal was a racially pure, thousand-year Aryan Reich. Stalin's was a classless global communist utopia. They were not merely cynical power seekers. They were fanatically dedicated to a future paradise. But this is what makes them so dangerous. As the Russian-born philosopher Ayn Rand observed with brutal clarity, do not confuse the idea that the end justifies the means with the idea that any end justifies any means. The necessary result of that belief is not merely corruption, but the apotheosis of the brute. This is the first step on the path. The ideal becomes so sacred, so absolute, that any action taken in its name is sanctified. The suffering of the present is rendered irrelevant for the glory of the future. But how does this logic move from paper to pogroms? We turn to the British philosopher Isaiah Berlin. He warned of the concept of positive liberty, the freedom to be something, to achieve your true potential, as defined by a higher ideal, the state, the race, the party. This sounds noble, but it contains a poison pill. If I know what your true self should be, but you are too ignorant or corrupt to see it, I am justified in forcing you to be free. This is the intellectual machinery of the guillotine. Stalin didn't murder the kulaks. He liquidated them as a class, removing a human obstacle to the communist utopia. The Nazis didn't exterminate the Jews. They were sanitizing the body politic of a bacillus. The language is clinical, ideological, and utterly devoid of humanity. The individual has been erased, replaced by a category, and a category can be deleted. The philosophers who saw it coming. This dark potential within idealism did not go unnoticed. Long before the 20th century, thinkers were mapping the fault lines. The French political thinker Alexis de Tocqueville, observing the fervor of the French Revolution, presciently identified the tyranny of the majority. Not just a tyranny of force, but of opinion. He wrote, "I know of no country in which there is so little independence of mind and real freedom of discussion as in America." He feared that the desire for equality could become so intense that it would erase dissent in a quest for homogenized conformity. But the most devastating critique comes from the 20th century itself. The philosopher Karl Popper, in his monumental work, The Open Society and Its Enemies, attacked the root of what he called historicism, the belief that history has an inevitable destiny, a final destination, like communism or the Third Reich. Popper argued that this belief is used to justify any atrocity along the way. He offered instead the open society, one that embraces piecemeal social engineering, constant criticism, and fallibility, the very opposite of a rigid, utopian plan. Perhaps the most chilling analysis comes from Hannah Arendt, who coined the phrase, "the banality of evil." Studying the trial of Adolf Eichmann, she concluded that the greatest evils are not committed by raving monsters, but by ordinary bureaucrats who simply follow orders, who are so dedicated to an ideological system that they cease to think for themselves. They are, in her words, thoughtless. The ideal has short-circuited their moral compass. The pattern is clear. The descent begins not with a scream of hatred, but with a whisper of a perfect idea. It progresses by dividing the world into the enlightened and the backward, the pure and the impure, and it culminates in the silencing and then the elimination of the obstacle to progress. So we must now turn to our own time. We are not building death camps, but are we witnessing the same philosophical mechanics at play in a new digital form? Let us examine the core tenets of what is often called wokeness, or critical social justice ideology, through this historical lens. The unquestionable ideal. The ideal is no longer a racial empire or a classless society, but a perfectly equitable, anti-racist, anti-sexist utopia. This is the new sacred end. And as with all sacred ends, the means are increasingly justified. We see this in the phenomenon of cancel culture, where a person's career and reputation can be liquidated as a necessary sacrifice to the ideal of a safe and inclusive community. The individual, once again, is subsumed by their category or a single mistake. The new historical destiny. The Marxist narrative of class struggle has been re-engineered into an immutable framework of identity-based power dynamics, the oppressor and the oppressed. As Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianov argue in The Coddling of the American Mind, this instills a culture of us versus them and what they call catastrophizing, where any microaggression or ideological deviation is seen as an existential threat to the utopian ideal, justifying a disproportionate response. The rejection of pluralism and debate. Isaiah Berlin's greatest warning was that a single defined idea of the good life is incompatible with human freedom. The new ideology often rejects this pluralism. It operates on a principle of standpoint epistemology, that your identity determines your access to truth. While this highlights valuable perspectives, in its most rigid form, it creates a caste system of credibility, where debate is impossible because the oppressor class is, by definition, morally and epistemically blind. This is the antithesis of Popper's open society, which thrives on falsifiability and criticism. The point of this exercise is not to say, this is the same as that. It is to sound an alarm about the patterns of thought that have historically led humanity into darkness. The idealism of Hitler and Stalin teaches us that the most dangerous force in the world is not cynical self-interest, but virtuous certainty. It is the belief that your compassion, your vision for a better world is so pure that it licenses you to coerce, to shame, to silence, and to destroy in its name. The antidote, offered by Popper, Berlin, and others, is not to abandon the pursuit of justice, but to pursue it with profound intellectual humility. It is to build a society that protects the right to be wrong, that values the individual over the category, and that prefers the messy, frustrating, and incremental work of democracy to the clean, brutal efficiency of the ideological guillotine. The question for our time is not whether we are good people with good intentions. The men who built the guillotines and the gas chambers believed they were too. The question is, will we choose the open society? Or will we, seduced by the siren song of a perfect future, begin building a new utopian prison, one righteous brick at a time?